I am going to be ranking all of the 20 drivers in my own tier list. Now, this is actually something that I did back in 2021, or at the beginning of 2021, and unfortunately for 2022, I forgot to do it again at the beginning of the season. But what's quite interesting is that a few fans, both on Instagram and on Twitter, actually messaged me and said, you know, can you do that again? That was a really fun video. So I thought, better late than never. And once again, I am back ranking the drivers. Now, I will have this tier list linked in the description box down below, so you guys can do it as well. And if you do want to post it on social media, maybe Instagram or Twitter, don't forget to tag me, because it is always so much fun seeing where, obviously, you know, you put the drivers and how you rank them and how it differs to my list as well. So yeah, that is a lot of fun as well. So once again, this tier list will be in the description box, linked at the very top, so you can go do it for yourself. All of the tiers are pretty self-explanatory, so we're going to jump straight into it. Here is my brand new tier list for 2022. Now, compared to the tier list that I had in 2021, I have made a few alterations. I've actually removed the tier, so yeah, it is a little bit different, but it's still kind of very similar. And again, as we go through the drivers, you'll kind of understand what each of the tiers mean, although they are pretty self-explanatory. Now, even though there is an order of drivers down here, I'm actually going to start with one specific driver, and that is Nicholas Latifi. Now, I have actually got a tier just for him. Now, this is actually not a joke. I do think I have the Nicholas Latifi tier right at the bottom, and the reason for that is because, again, all jokes aside, I really do feel that Nicholas Latifi just isn't good enough compared to the actual current grid. Like, even the drivers that I think are struggling in 2022, I feel like over the past year, 2 years, 3 years since he's been in Formula 1, he has shown that he's just not good enough. I know that he's a really nice guy and the team really do like him, but as I've said many times, if you're not good enough to be at Williams, if you're not good enough to be at the team at the back of the grid, you're not good enough to be in Formula 1. And ultimately, even the gap to Alex Albon, who took a year out in 2021, it's very worrying. And ultimately, I always feel bad kind of, you know, bashing on Nicholas Latifi, but that's just how I feel. Like, as much of a nice guy as he is, I do feel like he's a step below the grid. But yeah, let's get into all of the kind of, you know, the other drivers. So beginning with Daniel Ricciardo, pretty easy. I'm going to put him in something to prove. He's had a really poor couple of years, actually. And what's amazing is that I actually went back to the 2021 video that I did at the beginning of the 2021 season, and I had Daniel Ricciardo, before we saw him even in a single race at McLaren, I had him in borderline champions off the back of what he did, you know, at Renault in 2020. But so he has fallen a lot, but yeah, he definitely has something to prove. I feel like obviously he's not going to be in Formula 1, but with the amount that he struggled both in 2021 and also 2020, he does have to prove that he is still good enough to warrant one of those top drives in one of the upper midfield teams. And, you know, him being kicked out of McLaren for a rookie driver, the fact that he's going to have to miss 2023, I love Daniel Ricciardo, but it is really hard to see him. But ultimately, he does have something to prove. He has something to prove to himself if he wants to come back in 2024. So, yeah, it hurts me to put him there, but ultimately, yeah, that's where I have Daniel Ricciardo. Next up, we have Valtteri Bottas. Not too much to say. I have got him in quality midfield drivers. Valtteri has been just a solid and safe pair of hands for so many years. He proved at Mercedes last year that he just isn't he's definitely not best of the best. He's not even a borderline champion. He never really was able to push Lewis that much, but that doesn't mean that he's a bad driver. He's an absolute quality midfield driver. And in an environment like Alfa Romeo this year, I think he's done a fantastic job, kind of his own team, his own environment. And when that Alfa Romeo was arguably the best car in the midfield at the beginning of the season, Valtteri was arguably kind of the driver of the season very early on with some of the amazing qualifying performances and races that he had. So even though his season has decreased just a little bit because the car also unfortunately hasn't developed well throughout the season, he is still, Valtteri, a quality midfield driver and super dependable. So yeah, I'm pretty safe in putting him there. And also the next driver, Kevin Magnussen, again, there are some deficiencies in his driving. I think some of the needless incidents, especially like, you know, the ones with Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. You know, when you're in a Haas, when you're in the midfield, you're not racing a Red Bull or a Mercedes. And so K-Mag still has these moments where he kind of infuriates me because he has so much speed and so much talent, but sometimes he can go a little bit off the rails. But apart from those little incidents, again, another quality midfield driver, someone who's super dependable, just came into Haas off the back of not being in Formula 1 for a year. And I mean, he looked like he never should have left and never should have been kicked out. And if that's not the mark of a quality driver, I don't know what is. So again, I don't think he's quite in the category above, but he's certainly not in the category below as well. Next up, Max Verstappen, as if it's going to be anything else, best of the best, obviously world champion. He's had a ridiculous season, let's be honest. I don't really have too much to say about Max. He is the best driver in Formula 1 at the moment. He is at the top of that pyramid. He is sitting on the throne, quite literally, in the case of Japan. And yeah, he's absolutely kind of the guy to be in the best team, the best driver, the best car, and yeah, undoubtedly he is the best of the best. Next up, we have Esteban Ocon. Now, really interesting actually, because he's had a really good season actually in 2020, but I still would put him in quality midfield drivers. I don't think we've seen with Fernando Alonso moments of magic in that Alpine. Fernando's been quite unlucky, this season, but when it comes to Esteban Ocon, I haven't quite seen that next level where I would say he is a borderline champion. I think it's going to be very interesting how him and Pierre Gasly are going to work next year. But again, over the past 2 seasons, I mean, he obviously got his first ever win in 2021. And I really do think he took a jump up actually from 2020 to 2021, and he's continued that consistency into 2022. So again, one of the most dependable drivers. I do still think there's just something lacking, a little bit of magic that I think can maybe propel him to the next level. But again, up against Pierre Gasly, maybe he can kind of take that next step next year. But again, a really solid driver, having an unbelievably consistent season. And yeah, Esteban Ocon, he's doing a fantastic job. So yeah, in quality midfield drivers. Now, Carlos Sainz is the first one that's going to go in the borderline champions. Now, 2022 is the first year where Carlos Sainz has been given a championship level car, a race winning car. And although it did, and again, when you're given that car from the midfield, it kind of asks you a lot of different questions. It puts you in a different kind of level in terms of pressure inside the team. And when you have to go up against Charles Leclerc, that is also not very easy. Now, I do think that Carlos Sainz is better than these drivers, even in terms of just, forget about actually this season in 2022, even when he was in the midfield, he was always one of the consistent drivers. He kind of did everything that he needed to in a midfield car, and he was even able to kind of pinch the odd podium in 2021 at Ferrari, beating, of course, Leclerc in his first ever season at the team. And I think it just shows the quality of driver that Carlos Sainz is. Now, again, in this season, he was put in kind of a different level, a much faster car, a much more pressurized environment, fighting for a championship potentially at the beginning of the season, and he did not have a good start. He struggled with the car. There was quite a few little mistakes there and there, but I really do feel that as the season has gone on, he has got a lot more comfortable with the car. He's worked really hard on what was not working at the beginning of the season, and he has improved quite a bit. Now, he's also had quite a bit of bad luck. Obviously, the retirement in Austria, and also, of course, I think Baku as well. So, yeah, it's not been a plain sailing season. He did get his first ever win, but I really do feel like there is another level to Carlos Sainz. If he just, I don't think he's got the speed of Charles Leclerc, but I think he's got the brains to kind of be able to improve in different areas and perhaps maybe challenge for a championship one day. In terms of Pierre Gasly, again, not too much to say. Again, one of the more dependable drivers, not having a stunning season in 2022, which I think is also down to the car a little bit as well. But when you look at the level that he's been driving at over the past few years, when you look at what he did in that 2021 AlphaTauri, some of the stunning qualifying performances. I mean, I forget how many top 5 qualifyings he had, and he did a decent job in the championship as well. I think the fact that the car and that AlphaTauri haven't quite been able to deliver a better car, or even a car that's on the level of what they had last year in this season, it has hurt him just a little bit. He's also, he's also not been as consistent, so I do think he's dropped off just a little bit, but I think there's also a lack of motivation with him just being constantly at AlphaTauri, and I think him finally going to kind of his own team, getting away from Red Bull, I think that'll be very, very interesting up against Esteban Ocon. And to be fair, having those two kind of together in quality midfield drivers, that's kind of how I feel about them. They're super close in terms of the stats that they have, the points that they've scored, the podiums that they've been on, the race wins that they have. Like, they're two drivers that are very, very similar, and I think will also be very closely matched at Alpine next year. Charles Leclerc. Now, this is gonna be a controversial one because, to be brutally honest, I actually think that Charles Leclerc belongs in a category of his own, and it would be right in the middle. It'll be right behind Max. I don't think Charles Leclerc is quite as good as Max Verstappen. I think he's just an inch, a little bit, behind Max. But I do think that in terms of speed, he is clear of Carlos Sainz. So in reality, I'd love for there to be, just as there's a Latifi category, I would put a Leclerc category right in the middle of these two. However, that is not the game that we're playing. These are the categories we have. And to be brutally honest, Leclerc is going in best of the best. Now, I'm not saying that he's the perfect driver, but when you look at the beginning of the season when the car was working and when he was going up against Max Verstappen, race after race, we had that Red Bull versus Ferrari battle, he was more than Max's equal. So again, we've seen also a few cracks. I don't think that Charles Leclerc still is kind of, I think there's things that he needs to learn in terms of the way he works with the team, the way he motivates the strategy and guides the strategy. If he feels that there's something wrong, I feel like he needs to have that in his armory in terms of almost overtaking the team when he feels that, he needs to take charge of the strategy. So there are a few things that I think that he can improve on, but again, I know that he's not a world champion yet, but you can't tell me that the speed that he has, that he can't go up against Max Verstappen for a world title if he had a car that was consistent throughout the season, and if Ferrari also upped their game. Now, is that going to happen at Ferrari? I don't know. I'm not going to answer that question. I'm gonna leave that to my lawyer. I'm going to plead the fifth, as they say. So yeah, I do want to see Charles Leclerc as a Ferrari champion because I do think he has the minerals, he has the speed, he has the unbelievable car control. I think there's still a few things that he needs to learn, but to me, he is on the level of a Max Verstappen. So I am going to go with Charles Leclerc in best of the best. But again, in an ideal universe, I'd probably have him just an inch below Max Verstappen in the Leclerc category. But yeah, he is best of the best in my opinion. Wow, Lance Stroll. Now, I am going to have Lance Stroll actually in something to prove because he's definitely not in the Latifi category, that's for sure. I know that there's kind of this whole pay driver joke with Lance and obviously, Latifi as well, but Lance he has shown moments of magic, but he's also fumbled some really good results, and it just frustrates me because inside of Lance, I know that there's actually a decent driver, but I still go back to Austin. Austin was a race where he seemed to have the edge over Seb. He was having a fantastic race. And then in classic Lance Stroll style, he absolutely bottled it and crashed with Fernando Alonso, weaving down the straight, kind of jinking left and ruining his race. And I feel like that's the problem with Lance Stroll. Consistency or lack of consistency. On his day, he will have qualifying performances and he will have races where he is just phenomenal. But he still has this lack of consistency. He still isn't quite on the level. He's not on the level of a Gasly, an Ocon, a K-Mag or a Bottas. I do still think that he has something to prove. Now, don't get me wrong, I do feel like he deserves to be on the grid but that's why he's in something to prove, because I still feel like he isn't a nailed-on driver that, when you look at Formula 1, it's supposed to be the 20 best drivers in the world. I don't think that Lance Stroll is a nailed-on one of the 20 best drivers in the world. He's good enough to be on the grid, and he's not Latifi. He's been doing a pretty good job up against Seb, but he still has these moments where he bottles good results when they are on the table, and it's a little bit frustrating because I do think that there is some talent there. Next up, we have George Russell. Now, I've got George Russell in borderline champions, but to be brutally honest, I do think that George Russell is something special. I feel like the past kind of 5 or 6 races and some of the incidents that he's had, I think I've almost tainted his first season at Mercedes just a little bit, but when we look at the entire picture, he has been unbelievable. Going up against Lewis Hamilton in a very difficult car as well, I feel like not a lot of people are talking about that because it's one thing going to a new team where the car is very good, there's a lot of positivity. It's a whole other thing to go into the Constructors' Championship team from the previous season where they don't have a good car and they are on the back foot and you're not quite as excited, to be challenging for wins and championships potentially. And I feel like the W13, I think George Russell's actually struggled a little bit with it. I feel like that's some of the problems that he's had in terms of the braking, in terms of not being comfortable in wheel-to-wheel combat, and that has shown in some of the silly collisions that he's had. So again, I'm not saying he's had a perfect season, but on a talent level, if he seriously harnesses it, I do think that he is one of the best of the best. Now, I'm not going to put him in best of the best because I do feel like there are still a few rough edges for him to stand out, but I think he's got the ability and I think he's got the talent to be a multiple-time world champion and someone who I would consider with Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. I mean, I have talked in the past how I do think that he's got the ability to challenge these guys for a world title, and if he is given that car, I thoroughly expect him to take that next jump up in terms of consistency, in terms of knocking out some of those silly little mistakes, and I do expect him to be as good as Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. Like, that's how good I think he can be, but again, maybe he deserves to be in that kind of borderline Leclerc tier, but for now, I am going to leave him in borderline champions. But yeah, I feel like he's super close. All he needs is just a bit more consistency, and I think he's done a really good job in his first season at Mercedes. Still ahead of Lewis in the championship, although that's a super tight battle. But, you know, if you're battling with Lewis Hamilton in a tight title fight, or even a tight fight in the championship, you know that you are a good driver. Someone else who is also going in that borderline champions category is Lando Norris. I think over the past 2 seasons, I do think he took a big jump up actually in 2021 compared to 2020. And over the past 2 seasons, he's dominated Ricciardo. He's dominated that team. The results that he's had, he is still the only driver outside of the top 3 teams to get a podium in 2022. And I feel like it says exactly where he is. Lando has now reached that level where I think Charles Leclerc was kind of in 2020 and 2021, where we're just waiting for McLaren to finally give Lando that race-winning car, exactly what Carlos Sainz has right now in 2022, and then we can see what Lando is going to be able to do in that high-pressure environment where he's asked a lot more different questions and he's going to be tested a lot harder. But in terms of what he's done over the past 2 seasons, he is thoroughly, you know, in that kind of category with George Russell and Carlos Sainz in the borderline champions. But again, when he is given that race-winning car, he is going to be tested a hell of a lot more, and how he reacts to that. Is he going to be able to up his game as the car ups its game as well and is able of bigger results? That's what we're going to wait to see. But without having a race-winning car, he is undoubtedly, in my opinion, in borderline champions. Next up, we have Alex Albon. I'm pretty comfortable with putting him in quality midfield drivers. I feel like he's not quite on that next level. I don't think he's quite got that X factor, but the job he's done at Williams, I mean, even from day one, just even in Bahrain, you could see that he was going to do a decent job for the team, and he's definitely one of these drivers. Like, if you put, you know, if you had a combination of him and Valtteri or him and K-Mag, that is a very solid lineup. So yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with putting Alex in that kind of category, and I do want to see him in a better car because I think he's a really talented driver. I feel like when he's happy and he's in a good environment, he is just able to be himself a lot more, and he's a lot more calmer. And when he's a lot calmer, more calmer mentally, he's just been able to kind of do the job with Williams with a little bit less pressure than, of course, was at Red Bull. You know, all of that scrutiny when you're racing for Red Bull, I don't think it was good for Alex. And in his own team, in kind of a less scrutinized, a much, you know, less pressurized environment that was the Williams team in 2022, I think he's had a fantastic season. And yeah, I think he is a quality midfield driver. So yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with putting him there. In terms of Mick Schumacher, obviously, this season he is still, you know, as of recording, he is still fighting for his seat, and he hasn't had the best of seasons, not been super consistent. He's had quite a few issues, and he's got to be in something to prove. I do still think that he has improved, you know, he's gotten closer to K-Mag, but there is still just a little bit lack of consistency. And because I have said that, I'm also kind of looking at the past 2 years. I'm looking at what you've done over the past 2 years in Formula 1, not just this season. I do think that he's got something to prove. He's got something to prove to the team, even, that he should still be there for next season. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think he's hanging onto that Haas seat by, you know, by his fingernails, but it's looking day by day that they're going to go with Nico Hülkenberg. So yeah, I do feel like there is a good driver in Mick Schumacher. I do feel like he's improved, but I am not sure if Haas is the right team for him. I do hope that maybe he gets a chance at another team. It's looking less and less likely, but I do think that he has the ability to be a pretty decent Formula 1 driver, maybe even a quality midfield driver, but I don't think Haas has been the right environment for him, if I'm being honest. And he's also cost Haas a lot of money with all of the crashes and incidents. So yeah, to me, he's a driver who's definitely got something to prove, but again, kind of similar to, you know, even similar to Lance Stroll, he does have days where he can be a quality driver. So, and I do hope that we kind of see maybe in a different environment, maybe in 2024 if he can't get on the grid for next year. I do think that in a different environment, we might be able to see a better Mick Schumacher. Next up, we have Yuki Tsunoda, and I am also going to put him in something to prove. I do think that he's took a jump up compared to last season. Obviously, his rookie season was pretty up and down, let's just say, I think is the right words for that. He has improved in 2022, there's no doubt about it. He's gotten a lot closer to Pierre Gasly, but I still don't feel like... And he has also actually been quite unlucky as well on multiple occasions with strategy, reliability, but I just still think that he's a level below Pierre Gasly. I still feel like he's a level below some of these drivers. I do feel like there are stronger drivers, you know, out there that could replace Yuki, and I'm saying that as a massive Yuki Tsunoda fan. I'm all in on the Yuki, I'm part of Yuki Hive, there's no doubt about it. And whilst he has made improvements, I don't think he's quite on the level of some of these drivers, but he's got another season next year up against Nick de Vries, which is going to be a very interesting partnership. And yeah, I think what he manages to do up against Nick de Vries is going to be massive for his career. So yeah, I've got Yuki Tsunoda in something to prove. As far as Zhou Guanyu now, I'm also going to put Zhou in something to prove now. I think he's had a pretty solid rookie season. I feel like he's been really unlucky at times. I feel like in terms of DNFs, Alfa Romeo have had an absolute shocker this season because not only has their car been really inconsistent in terms of performances, but also I remember, you know, Zhou is, I think he's like one of the drivers with the most reliability DNF. So at times he hasn't had the equipment to show his talent. But overall, if you compare him to Mick Schumacher, he hasn't crashed nearly as much. He's been a lot closer to Valtteri, especially as the season has progressed. So again, I don't think he's in this quality midfielder category or tier. But he has had, I think, a very good rookie season, and I look forward to seeing how he progresses even further in 2023. So a solid start. He's nothing amazing, he's nothing out there, he's not a future world champion, but a solid start to his F1 career. And again, I look forward to seeing how he develops in 2023. In terms of Fernando Alonso, undoubtedly borderline champions. The championship table obviously doesn't reflect his season. He's another one like Zhou, who's had just ridiculous bad luck, especially recently with some of the reliability issues that he's had, and also being crashed off, like, you know, in Austin by Stroll. Fernando has still got it. I don't really care about his age. I don't feel like we're even talking that much anymore about his age. He's had a fantastic season individually in terms of like some of the highlight performances. He's been unbelievably consistent when the car actually gets to the end of the Grand Prix. He obviously had that standout qualifying, I think qualifying second right next to Max in Canada as well. That was pretty special. And in the race, he had another reliability issue. So yeah, it's definitely been quite interesting for Fernando. I feel like, again, individually, outside of all of the reliability issues, he is more than just, you know, he's on the level of these guys undoubtedly. Like, if you put Fernando up against Lando or George or Carlos, he is going to be super competitive, and he might even beat some of these three. So yeah, I think he's still got it. Even at the age of 41, he is still a driver who to me is a borderline champion. If you put him, you know, he is a champion, but he is a driver who to me has shown, especially in 2022, that he has still got that fire. He's still got that desire and drive to be a world champion, potentially a third-time world champion if he is given the car. And his performances have warranted for me to put him in that level. So yeah, I am very comfortable with putting Fernando Alonso in that category. Next up, we have Lewis Hamilton, a really easy one. I know he's not had the kind of, again, the smoothest of seasons, and especially at the beginning, I do think that it was a little bit tricky for Lewis and Mercedes to kind of adjust mentally from going from always having a race-winning car, turning up to every single Grand Prix, knowing that you have a chance of winning and competing, and when you're given, you know, a car that is only really capable on a good day of a podium, I do think that there was a bit of an adjustment for Lewis. But I do think that since Canada, and Canada I think was a specific race where things just clicked for Lewis. It was completely different, and ever since then I think he has been up there with Max Verstappen as kind of the two best drivers. Again, the reason why I put Leclerc in kind of his own, or why I talked about putting Leclerc in kind of his own category, is because I do think that he is still just an inch kind of behind the likes of Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. They are the two best drivers on the grid in terms of speed, in terms of consistency, in terms of experience, in terms of driving the team, and also in terms of winning. So again, I know Lewis has not had the perfect season. There's been a few mistakes, there's been a few incidents, like obviously with Fernando in Spa, but he's proving, especially in the second half of the season, he is really charging, you know, and kind of, he looks like he might be able to beat George Russell, who had obviously a great start. And we know at the beginning of the season that Lewis was used as a bit of a guinea pig to Mercedes. So we don't know to what extent and, you know, what kind of setups he was running, but purely on a results basis and purely from what I'm seeing with my eyes, Lewis Hamilton is still one of the absolute best drivers on the grid, and in a title, you know, in a title contending car. We saw last season, you know, outside of Abu Dhabi, he would have been the champion. So he's still, to me, at the top of his game, and he is still one of the best, undoubtedly. Next up, we have the retiring Seb, and I have got Seb in borderline champions. I have actually been more impressed with Seb in 2022 than I was in 2021. Again, going into the season, Aston Martin brought a horrible car. They've made so many updates to it. They kind of came up with a new concept in Spain, and as they developed throughout the season, as the car has got better, Seb has had some unbelievable races and unbelievable performances that still kind of makes me think that he's still easily one of the best drivers, you know, in that upper midfield if he was given a quick enough car. I go back to Spa, I think that was a really strong race, and Austin as well. He's had these moments of magic of what I would consider the old Sebastian, and it's been great to see because obviously we know that he's leaving at the end of the year, and just to know that he's leaving on a high, he's leaving performing well in, yes, you know, not a great car, but it's the performances that matter. I know that he's not in a race-winning car, but he is still doing a fantastic job in that Aston Martin, and also doing really well in the championship as well. So yeah, still undoubtedly not just a quality midfield driver, he is still undoubtedly a borderline champion, looking at the results that he's been able to kind of achieve in that kind of inconsistent Aston Martin across the season. And then last up, we have Sergio Perez, and again, a borderline champion. When I look at some of these quality midfield drivers, Sergio Perez had his years in the midfield, and he was always best of the rest. He was always capable of podiums. He was always right up there in the Force Indias and Racing Points. And finally, I feel like in 2022, he was a lot more comfortable with the car. He's not in that category of best of the best. He's not with the likes of Max and Charles and Lewis, but he is, you know, he more than holds his own up against the likes, I think, of with Alonso and Russell and Sainz. And yeah, I feel like obviously he's still battling for second in the championship. I feel like he's had a relatively good season, and it's just kind of fantastic. So yeah, that is kind of my tier list complete. And to be honest, I am pretty happy with it, actually. I feel like that's kind of how I feel about all of these drivers in terms of where they are. In terms of little changes, again, I'd probably have Leclerc in kind of his own tier just behind Lewis and Max, but he also thoroughly deserves to be there as well. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh on Yuki. I do feel like he's improved, but just he's not quite on the level of these quality midfield drivers. And yeah, I feel pretty good about that, not gonna lie. But again, let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box below in terms of what you would change, what you agree with, what you disagree with. I'm sure there's gonna be plenty of opinions. And once again, in the description, I will have a link to this tier list so you guys can go and do it yourself. And if you do post it on social media, maybe Instagram or Twitter, don't forget to tag me as well so I can see your tier list as well. Anyway, there you have it. That is this video wrapped up. If you did enjoy it and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That is the #1 way that you can show your support for the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.